Life processes. Today, we're going to discuss about the life. What is life? Where does it exist? Life is found in the living things. The things that have life are called living things. The things that do not have life are called non-living things. You have been studying about the living things and non-living things since class 3, 4, 5 from your lower classes. You are learning about living and non-living things. And you learned that living things have some characters. Based on that, we can say that this is a living thing and this is a non-living thing. When you were studying about the living things in your class 3 or 4, you learned that this is a rock which cannot move on itself, so it is a non-living thing. This is a dog which can run, shout, bark, jump, so it has some movements, so this dog is a living thing. In such a way, on basing certain features, you could distinguish which is living, which is non-living. Say, the first one, we take it as movement. Movement is one of the features on basing which you can decide whether a thing is living or non-living. You see so many examples around you. A boy running, a man shouting. Shouting in the sense, where do you find the movement? The movement in his lips, in his mouth, he is shouting. A dog barking. So we take the movement, a fish swimming, a bird flying, a horse running. So all these things, they have some movement, either in their body or their body, whole body is moved from one place to another place, locomotion. So this is one of the important characteristics of living things we consider. The second one, what do we see? Living things eat food, they take food. Living things, they take food. You see a cow chewing cud, a cow eating grass, a boy eating cookies, a boy eating his food. We all eat because we need energy to survive, to do our daily activities. So definitely we eat. So eating is also one of the features. We can take it, eating. And what else we take? What other features we take to decide whether a thing is living or non-living? Growth. Living things grow. That means increase in their size. Living things increase in their size from time to time. A small baby, a newborn baby, is grown to a kid. From the kid to an adolescent, from an adolescent to an adult. So movement is one of the features by which we can distinguish living and non-living things. And the second one is eating, taking food, growing. The third one, living things produce the young ones of their own kind. That is, reproduce. Reproduce. Living things produce the young ones of their own kind. Dog gives birth to a puppy. Man gives birth to a baby. Such a way, every living thing produces own kind. A new one or an young one of its own kind, we call it as reproduce, and it is one of the features we can take to distinguish between living and non-living things. And one more, response to stimulus. Stimulus. You go near a small cat or any other small animal, by seeing you, it will be frightened and run away. If you go near a chicken, it runs away by making some sound. It is frightened. It responds to the stimulus. It finds it is the danger. You are the danger coming to catch it. So it runs. In the same way, even in plants, we see that certain plants, they show response to the stimulus. If you touch the leaves of touch me not plant, the leaves contract, they show some movement and they show some response to the stimuli. So this is the another feature by which you distinguish living and non-living things. But you cannot say this is a living or this is a non-living thing based on any one of the feature here. Simply just by looking at the movement, you cannot say this is living and non-living. Because you see, we see the movements in animals, movements in their body parts, and movement of the animal from one place to another place completely, locomotion. But we cannot find any movements in plants. In plants, we cannot see any movements to our visible, they are not visible to our naked eye. Of course, the roots of plants may move in the soil, but it is very slow and not visible. So, by looking at that, you may say that I don't see any movements in this plant. So, can you consider the plant is a non-living thing because due to the absence of movement? No. So, in your lower classes, that is accepted, okay. You don't know what is happening in the cellular level or molecular level. So, there you have distinguished with the help of some movement, some features like movement, eating, growing, reproduction, response to stimuli. The second one, eating. You see the animals eating, visible to your naked eye, but plants, you don't find any plant eating directly. So you don't find any kind of movements, you don't find the plants eating directly except some parasitic plants. So you don't find that plants eating the food directly either through their leaves. They prepare their own food, but it is not visible to the naked eye. So on basing this, taking food, on basing this feature, you cannot distinguish this is living, this is not living. And growing, increasing in size. So this is also not the exact one to distinguish between living and non-living things. Living things grow, plants they grow in their size. Even animals grow in their size. Sometimes certain non-living things also grow in their size because of the climatic conditions, physical phenomena, they may increase in their size. But it doesn't mean that they have life. For example, we may observe the expansion of certain materials due to heat. So that means it increases in its size. But we cannot consider that is growth. We cannot consider that is that they have life. We cannot tell that they have life even though their size is increased. Sometimes certain materials absorb water and get imbibed, increased in their size. You cannot take it as growth. You cannot say that they have life in them. So we cannot take even this growth in its size, increasing in its size, it cannot be considered. And reproduction. So of course, we can consider this as it is a very important life process only possible in living things and response to stimulus. But even you see this reproduction or response to stimulus, sometimes, see for example, we have seen some animal like cow. A cow, whenever you go and touch the cow or you try to hit the cow with a stick, it responds. It moves away or it moves its head or tail. If you try to hit a dog with a stone, never do this, this is very dangerous. Just I am giving an example. The dog may bark at you or the dog may run away. So there is response and stimulus. You can take this response and stimulus. Yes, this is the character by which I can distinguish between living and non-living. But if the dog is sleeping, it is not aware that you have approached the dog, then there is no response. Will it mean that it is a non-living thing? If the dog is sleeping, it has not seen you, it didn't get your presence, then it is sleeping. It didn't respond. It doesn't mean that it is a non-living thing. So, apart from all this, of course, we can take these characters, these features to distinguish between living and non-living, but there are certain issues when you cannot explain alone with these features or characters, you cannot totally distinguish between living and non-living things. Somebody says that living things breathe. They breathe. That means there is a movement. You can feel the air coming in and coming out. Movement. But in plants, you cannot feel that there. Even plants breathe. So breathing is found in plants, but no one recognizes the breathing in plants. Even they breathe. So that is the one more thing. And the movements. Sometimes certain movements of living things are not observed, very minute, at small scale. Then can you say that if there is no movement, there is no life? Of course not. There will be movements which are very minute, which are not observed by us. And even though if anything has got very trace or minute movements, you cannot consider it as living. Say for example a material, a metal, it has some atoms in that. So in these atoms there are subatomic particles which are vibrating, moving. So there is a movement in this metal. So can you consider this metal as a living thing as it has got some kind of movement? No, it's not living, even though it has got minute movements. So at one particular level, you cannot use these characters to exactly distinguish between the living and non-living. So what exactly living is? How will you define that? How can you know that what is living thing? What essential characters a living thing must have? So let us come back to this movement. By taking that or by using the visible movements, we cannot distinguish the living and non-living. Even in case of living things, there will be certain movements which are invisible. We can say them molecular movements. We call them as molecular movements. So in a living system, there are so many molecules which are continuously moving, changing their form, and it is a dynamic system. There we find an organization. Various kinds of molecules are organized into different structures. All these structures, they make up a unit called cells. Cells are organized to tissues. Tissues are organized to organs. Organs are organized to organ system. Organ systems are organized into an organism. So this kind of a structure hierarchy is found in the living systems. So the molecular movements are very important to say that it is a living thing. And how are the molecular movements? And how are these molecules are arranged? In a systematic order. There is a hierarchy. And it is not standard or stable. It is dynamic. It is ever changing. Sometimes these structures, they get destroyed. So it need to be maintained, repaired. Some of the cells may be destroyed. So new cells are to be formed. Sometimes the cells may be damaged. So these cells are to be repaired. So this kind of system is existing in the living things. This is achieved by various processes. What is achieved? The maintenance. The repair and maintenance of these structures, it's keep on going in a living system. Once it stops, the repair and maintenance of these structures, the cells to tissues, tissues to organs, organ systems and organism, if it fails, it starts breakdown and the repair and maintenance is stopped, then the organism is dead. So the molecular movements are very important. And not only that, so if we find an organized system here, an organization is found. So this is what we can use to say that this is living and this is non-living. Scientists say that there are no molecular movements in virus. What do you say? Will you consider this virus as a living thing or non-living thing? So according to this, if you wanted to consider it as a living, a virus do not have any molecular movements unless until it enters a living system. Unless until it enters a living cell, it doesn't show any molecular movements. So what do you say? Living or non-living? So many people consider it is non-living as it is outside the living systems. It will be living, it will be considered as a living thing once it enters the living systems or cells. Because outside the cell, outside the living system, it's just a non-living thing. It doesn't possess any molecular movements. What are life processes? So here we have discussed about the main character by which we can distinguish what is living and non-living. So the living things, they have the basic feature. What is that? They have the movement of molecules, and these molecules, they make up the structures, an organization. So this organization has to be kept there, and if it is destroyed, it has to be repaired and it has to be maintained. So for this maintenance, continuous flow of molecules is required. So how this movement of molecules takes place, how the supply of molecules takes place for this maintenance job. So whatever the organization is there, cells to tissues to organs to organ system, organization, the organism. So the organism, it has to live. For the condition of life, for the condition of living, it has to be maintained continuously. The repairs has to be done. The needed energy has to be supplied. So this is the repair and maintenance job. It keeps on going on even though the organism is not doing anything in particular. Say for example, today is a holiday for you. So you're not doing any job over there. You're not going to school, you're not playing, just you're sitting in the sofa and watching TV. So just you're sitting or relaxing on the bed. Even then, you need energy. Even then, in your body, the life processes, they have to go on. In the sake of maintenance of your systems. So even though you're not doing any job, your systems are to be maintained and repairs has to be done. So even though you're not doing anything particular, that means your body needs supply of molecules for the process of maintenance. So your body needs energy. So from where these molecules are supplied to you, you get the continuous supply of molecules through your food. We call this life process the process by which the food, that is the chemical molecules that are supplied to the body for maintenance and growth, it is nutrition. So nutrition is the process in which you obtain the materials needed for your body, either for production of energy, either for growth, repair, maintenance and all such. So that is nutrition. Every living thing, it need to have the life process nutrition. Nutrition is a very important life process. One of the important life processes, because it is the main thing which supply the energy to your body in the form of molecules. So energy is present outside in the sun, solar energy. It is transformed to chemical energy in the form of food material, food substances, either fruits or vegetables or cereals or pulses, whatever you eat as food. So the food contains energy in the form of chemicals or molecules. By the process of nutrition, these molecules are taken in and the energy is released in your body and supplied for the different purposes like maintenance. So not only maintenance, growth is also required. When you are at a growth period, so we grow till certain age. So thereafter there will be a lot of maintenance in the body. Since you are growing up, you are a growing kid, in your body the bones are to be grown, muscles are to be grown and different things, blood vessels, nerves, everything. So all these need supply of molecules to grow. Most of our systems, many parts of our body and cells are made up of or built up of carbon molecules, carbon-based molecules. Hydrocarbons, fats, proteins, amino acids, and carbohydrates. All these are carbon-based molecules. So we need a continuous supply of carbon-based molecules from the environment. So this is done by the process of nutrition. So these raw materials are supplied to serve the first purpose is maintenance. That is the repair and maintenance of our body. That is the first one. For that purpose, energy is supplied in the form of chemical molecules. Second one is growth. So here we identified one life process, that is nutrition. So here we identified one important life process, that is nutrition. So nutrition in the sense the living things obtain the necessary materials from the environment. So that is called as nutrition. It includes how the organisms obtain their food, the molecules necessary for maintenance and growth. So that comes under nutrition. The food is available in different forms in the environment. The energy is available in the environment in different forms. Of course, our cells may need different form of energy, but the energy is present in another form in the outside world. So the transformation of energy has to take place. So we have eaten some food, fruits, vegetables, cereals, pulses. All these things, they contain so many molecules, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, these kind of different molecules. That is the chemical energy. But our cells, they need energy in the form of some other molecule, so-called ATPs. So a cell needs ATP. But you cannot directly eat ATPs from outside world. So by the process of nutrition, you have obtained something which is called as a protein, which is called as a carbohydrate, which is called as a amino acid. You cannot get ATPs directly. So your cells need ATPs to make energy. Your cells need ATPs for maintenance. Your cells need ATPs to produce energy. So, whatever the molecules we take, they are to be converted into the form of energy which is needed by the cells for the movement of molecule in the cells. So, this is done by another life process. We are taking food. Our food, the major part of our food is carbohydrates which give energy. So you are eating carbohydrate, rice or wheat in the form of chapati or roti, rice in the form of steamed rice along with some vegetables and other things. So the major part is carbohydrate. So this carbohydrate, it's a carbon-based compound. It gives energy. How it gives energy? This is achieved by another life process called as respiration. The second one, respiration. In this, the molecules like glucose are oxidized. Here the substances are oxidized and reduced to convert the molecules which you have taken as food into the form of energy. So energy is released from the food by a life process called as respiration. So we discussed that for the maintenance of life, for the maintenance of structures in a living system, various life processes are essential. So among those, we identified the first one is nutrition and the second one is respiration, in which different reactions like oxidation, reduction takes place to convert the molecules which we have taken as food into the energy, into the form which can be easily utilized by the cells. That is respiration. So we'll see what is this respiration, what are the different kinds, phases of respiration, what are the various steps and how the process of respiration takes place in the coming up sessions. We'll see what is that. But here we identified the second life process and its importance. So we have seen the site of photosynthesis, the location of the photosynthesis and the requirements of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a process in which carbon dioxide, water are converted to carbohydrate in presence of sunlight with the help of chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is very essential for the process of photosynthesis. It is found in the green parts of the plant, that is the leaves. So do all leaves contain chlorophyll? Yes, most of the leaves are green. That means they contain chloroplast. In that chlorophyll is present. So some plants, if you observe certain plants like crotons, they have variegated leaves. Means the leaf which is not having green color throughout, the green color is spread in the form of patches. So with the help of these variegated leaves, we can explain the importance of chlorophyll. We can show that chlorophyll is necessary for photosynthesis. We can show that if there is no chlorophyll, no photosynthesis takes place. If we see this variegated leaf, here we have some patches or some areas where green color, chlorophyll is present at these places. The other area is white, that means there is no chlorophyll. So now let us see the experiment by which we can prove that chlorophyll is necessary for the process of photosynthesis. So here we are taking the variegated leaf to do our activity. So what do we need for our activity to prove that chlorophyll is necessary for photosynthesis? We need a plant with variegated leaves. We can take some croton with variegated leaves. We need a potted plant. So first, this potted plant, it has to be destarched. So it should be kept in dark for 3 days. Why it should be kept in dark for 3 days? Because it is in sunlight, it is preparing the food, starch is present in the leaves. So we don't want any starch in the leaves. First, we wanted to discharge the total plant, the leaves. So we kept it in dark. So then we have taken the plant and kept it in sunlight for 6 hours. We have taken the plant and kept in sunlight for 6 hours. Now we kept the plant in sunlight for 6 hours. So there is photosynthesis, starch is prepared. Now you have to select and pluck a leaf out of that plant. So we selected a leaf like this. So this is a variegated leaf, that means it has got green patches here and the remaining area is white. So now we are going to trace this leaf, make a copy of this leaf for our further reference. That means later we can refer what changes happened, where the color change was happened. So in this way we are tracing the places where the green color is there in the leaf, we traced it. Now we are going to test this leaf for the presence of starch, where the photosynthesis took place in this leaf. So how do we do that? First, we have to boil this leaf in water. Keep this leaf in boiling water for few minutes. Keep in boiling water for few minutes. After that, keep this leaf in a beaker of alcohol. Now, this beaker, it has to be kept in a water bath, a small tub with water. So the beaker has to be kept in another container which contains water, and the whole setup has to be kept on fire, some burner. So here what we are doing, we are boiling the leaf in alcohol, but we cannot do that directly because alcohol is highly inflammable and there is a chance of catching fire. So never boil alcohol directly on flame. So we have taken the alcohol in a beaker and that is kept in a water bath. So by that, the heat is supplied to the alcohol to boil, not the direct fire. So with this setup, the alcohol starts to boil. Now what happens to the leaf? The leaf starts losing its color into the alcohol. The alcohol turns to green, that means the color in the leaf, it comes to alcohol. Now the leaf is decolored, it loses its color. Now take some dilute iodine solution. Iodine is used to test the presence of starch. When starch comes in contact with iodine, it turns dark blue in color. So now we have to take this leaf and dip it in the dilute iodine solution. Let us see what happens to the leaf. We dipped the leaf in this dilute iodine solution. So that leaf, the areas which were green earlier, they turn dark blue. The other area remains same, colorless. What does it mean? So here we have seen the white area, colorless area. There was no chlorophyll, no photosynthesis. Only in these patches there was green color. So only in these patches we find the dark blue color. Starch was formed only in those areas. What does it mean? Chlorophyll is essential for photosynthesis. If there is no chlorophyll in a particular part of a leaf, there is no photosynthesis. So it shows the necessity of chlorophyll. We can prove it with the help of this activity. Now let us look at one more activity which helps us to understand the necessity of carbon dioxide. So the necessary elements for photosynthesis, we have discussed that chlorophyll is important, carbon dioxide is important, water is important. If any of these things are missing, there is no photosynthesis, even sunlight. So we have seen that there in the first experiment, chlorophyll is necessary for photosynthesis. As there is no chlorophyll in certain parts of leaf, there is no photosynthesis, no starch found in those areas. Now let us prove the importance or necessity of carbon dioxide with some other activity. So there you need a potted plant for this activity. You need a potted plant. So keep the potted plant in dark for 3 days to destarch it. Dark for 3 days to destarch. So we have taken 2 plants for this experiments. So 2 plants in dark for 3 days to destarch it. So now we have brought the plants out into the sun. When you keep it in dark for 3 days, the starch already present in the leaves is used up. Now there is no more starch in the leaves. So you kept the plants in sunlight, but you made some other arrangements. You have taken a bell jar and you covered the plant with these bell jars. So the bottom of the bell jar is kept in contact with the surface, and here you applied some grease or Vaseline to prevent the entry of air into this bell jar. So you don't want any air entering into the bell jar. And here you have taken one more bell jar and you arranged in the same way with Vaseline. Here also you kept it. Both the plants are in sunlight. So they are well watered before you keep the bell jar. So they have water, they have green leaves. That means they have chlorophyll, they have water, they have sunlight because they are in glass jars. So light can easily pass through. But what is missing? Air is missing. So you made that air is not available to these leaves, but you may get one doubt. So here is this much of room inside the bell jar. This room may have some carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. Yes, you are correct. So that is that reason why we keep a small dish with potassium hydroxide crystals. What does this potassium hydroxide do? It absorbs the carbon dioxide present in this room, in this bell jar. So the carbon dioxide is absorbed by this. So there is no carbon dioxide available for this plant to carry out photosynthesis. You kept it in sunlight for few hours, some 5 to 6 hours. So after that time, you removed the bell jars and you plucked the leaf of this plant, say A, and you plucked the leaf of this plant B. You tested both the plants for the presence of starch. You know how to do the experiment. We have seen in that before activity. Boil the leaf in water, put it in the alcohol, boil it over water bath and remove that and dip it in dilute iodine solution. So you will find a difference between the amount of starch present in B and A. In which case do you think there is some amount of starch prepared? Is it B or A? Yes, it is B. Because here we made an arrangement and we avoided the entry of carbon dioxide, but still there is some carbon dioxide inside this bell jar by which this leaf can prepare the food. But here we have used the potassium hydroxide which absorbs the carbon dioxide completely. So there is no possibility of photosynthesis here. So by this experiment you can prove that carbon dioxide is necessary for photosynthesis. So in the Heterotrophic nutrition we have seen that how green plants are able to make their own food. So that is, The materials, the simple materials like carbon dioxide and water which are present in the environment are taken up, and with the help of chlorophyll, using the sun energy, that is the light energy, these materials are converted to a substance called as glucose. Primarily glucose, which is the major source of energy even for the plant and even for the other animals, heterotrophs, which depend on plants. So this glucose, when it is prepared in large amounts, it is stored in the form of a starch. So plants or the autotrophic organisms, they are able to make the materials required for their maintenance or survival. So they can prepare these materials on their own. But are these two materials sufficient for the growth of the plant? A plant has to grow, not only meeting its energy requirements. So apart from the energy requirement, there are another requirements. Even plant has to repair its tissues. Even the plants, they have to grow. They should flower. They should produce fruits and seeds. So by that they can reproduce. So to make the new parts and cells, apart from these glucose and starch, some other materials and molecules are required by plants. So plants, they need proteins. Plants, they have to make proteins in their body, amino acids in their bodies, and fats in their bodies. How these new molecules are prepared? So to make proteins, nitrogen is required, because to make carbohydrates, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, these are enough. These are present. Hydrogen and oxygen is present in water, and this is present in carbon dioxide. Carbon is present in carbon dioxide. So plant is getting carbon, hydrogen, oxygen from carbon dioxide and water. But to make proteins, what is required? Nitrogen is required. So where is the nitrogen? Nitrogen is present in the atmosphere. Air has got lot of nitrogen. 78% of air is nitrogen. So can the plant directly breathe in the nitrogen from the atmosphere through its stomata? No, it is not possible. Plants cannot breathe nitrogen. They cannot use the nitrogen in gaseous form which is in the air. So the nitrogen present in the air cannot be taken by the plants. So what do they do? How do they meet their nitrogen requirements? Apart from the nitrogen, they need other materials, other elements like phosphorus, sulfur, zinc. From where do they get these materials? So plants, they get water from the soil, they absorb through the roots, they get carbon dioxide from the air through the stomata. The plants also get nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, zinc and other kind of mineral salts which are required for the formation of new molecules like proteins, amino acids, vitamins and different materials to make their new cells. For the growth, they get all these minerals from the soil. So soil is the source of all these minerals to the plants. So from where do these minerals come to the soil? Especially nitrogen. It is the most important mineral needed for the growth of the plant. From where does this nitrogen comes to the soil? So nitrogen, it reaches the soil. The nitrogen which is present in the air, it comes to the soil by different processes, by that physical process like lightning and by the biological process like nitrogen fixing bacteria. So the plants, they may use the inorganic nitrites and nitrates present in the soil or the nitrogenous compounds that are formed by the bacteria, nitrogen fixing bacteria present in the soil. So in this way, the atmospheric nitrogen is fixed into the soil. So these nitrogenous compounds are taken up by the plant, that is along with the water from the root. So these minerals are supplied to different parts, and by mixing these nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur and all these things to the primary material glucose and starch, several biochemical reactions takes place and a variety of biomolecules are formed in the plant's body. So these biomolecules are used for its repair, for its growth, for the formation of flowers, fruits and different things. So in this way, the autotrophic nutrition, it helps the plants to meet the requirement of molecules needed for the maintenance of life and for the growth and development of the autotrophic organisms. Now let us look at the heterotrophic nutrition. This is the another mode of nutrition in which the organisms, they depend on other organisms for their food requirements, for their energy requirements. Let us see how. So again, in this heterotrophic nutrition, here the mode of nutrition of an organism, it depends upon the type of the food and availability of the food. So how is that? What type of food it is and how it is available? For example, you see certain foods are stationary, means the food of cow is stationary. It is grass, it stays still there on the land. So the cow has to go and eat the grass, even the goat. But whereas in some cases the food is mobile, that means it moves. The animal has to hunt it, the animal has to catch it. Say for example lion or tiger, it has to hunt its food because the food is running. So in this way, the way it obtains the food is different depending upon the type of food and availability of the food. And these organisms, they have different strategies in the mode of their nutrition. Certain organisms, they break down the food outside their bodies, or they may take the food which is being broken down, and they use the nutrients. But certain organisms, they take the food into their bodies first, then they digest the food. Like us, we eat the food, later we digest it. So the organisms which feed on the food which is being broken down are called as saprophytes, and the mode of nutrition is called as saprophytic. Saprophytes are also a part of heterotrophs. So the saprophytic nutrition is also a part of heterotrophic nutrition. What does this saprophytic nutrition means? It means if the organisms are feeding on the organism which is already died and broken down, being broken down. For example, we see that mold, fungus, all kind of fungus, mold, bread molds, mushrooms. So what are these? These are a kind of fungus. What does this fungus do? Fungus, it cannot prepare its own food. So it is not an autotroph. It depends on other organisms for the food. It cannot eat the organism and digest it. It is not having the complex system and structure to digest the food. So what does it do? It is feeding on the decaying matter. That means, for example, a rotten wooden log. A wooden log is being rotten in the wet rain. So after the rain, the bark of the wooden log becomes rotten. So at this time, the nutrients are readily available. So by that, these molds grow. In the same way, any organism is died. After the organism is dead, it is fed by a lot of different bacteria and fungus. So the fungus, it feeds on the decaying matter. Such mode of nutrition is called as saprophytic mode of nutrition, and such organisms are called as saprophytes. So here the breakdown of the food takes place outside the body. They cannot break down the food inside their bodies. They don't have any structures, they don't have any special enzymes to do the job. So that is saprophytic. What is the other case? See, animals like cat, dog, we the human beings, birds and reptiles, many of these animals, they eat the food. So after eating the food is digested in their stomach with the help of certain chemicals called as enzymes. So with the help of enzymes, the food is digested, that is converted into complex form to simple form. So these simple nutrients are absorbed into the blood, supplied to the cells, and helps for the maintenance, growth and various activities of the organisms. So that is breakdown of food inside the body, example humans and all the other higher animals. We also find one more kind of nutrition here, that is parasitic mode of nutrition. This also comes under the heterotrophic mode of nutrition, but here the organisms, they do not kill the other organism, just they feed on it. Here in this case, we can find certain plants also under this heterotrophic nutrition. But basically here we are talking about these animals which eat the other animals or which may eat the other plants. So here in this parasitic mode of nutrition, we see parasitic plants and parasitic animals. Under the parasitic plants, you see that we can take that cuscuta. Cuscuta is a plant which is having a special structure called as haustoria, by which it sucks the juices from other plants and it feeds on the other plants. So it is dependent on the other plants for the nutrients, but it is not killing the other plant. So that is what an example for the parasitic plant and parasitic mode of nutrition, which comes under heterotrophic nutrition. And the other animals that come under this parasitic nutrition are leech. Leech, it feeds on the blood of animal. It does not kill even the ticks or mites. Ticks or mites. And we can say that mosquitoes. So these are the examples of the parasitic organisms. So we see these different kinds of modes of nutrition under heterotrophic nutrition. So that is saprophytic mode of nutrition, where the organisms are dependent on decaying matter, and parasitic mode of nutrition, where the organisms do not kill the other organism but feed on them. Just they live on them and get the materials from them. So this is about the heterotrophic nutrition. Now let us see the heterotrophic nutrition in humans. Before we look how the human digestive system is organized and how the process of nutrition, that is how the food obtained and how the food is digested in the human digestive system, before that let us discuss how different organisms obtain their food. So what are the various means, what are the various structures that help the organisms to obtain the food? So different organisms, they have different parts to get their food. You see an elephant, how does it get its food? It uses its trunk to pluck the leaves and fruits and put the leaves and fruits in its mouth. It has got mouth parts to chew and eat. Even we have hands to catch the food and eat it through our mouth. So mouth is the point at which the food enters our body. So this is all the case of multicellular organisms and well-developed organisms. They have well-developed structures to get the food. Then how about single-celled organisms? Say for example, amoeba. Amoeba is a single-celled organism. How does it get its food? Amoeba is an aquatic organism, lives in the moist and wet places in the water. It is a single-celled organism. It has only one cell throughout its life. Its body is made up of one cell. Then how can it possess special structures? Here, when the food is close to amoeba, so this amoeba, it produces some special folds in its cell membrane. This is only one cell. This is the cell membrane. The cell membrane is folded like this and it gives out some projections called as pseudopodia, false feet. So these protrusions or extensions, they encircle the food like this. So the food is engulfed by the paramecium. So in this way, the food is brought into the cell of the paramecium. Inside the cells, the enzymes are present to digest the food. That means to convert the food into useful materials. And the undigested food is sent out of the body surface through contractile vacuoles. That is by the contractile vacuoles. And here these are the pseudopodium, false feet. So in this way, in case of amoeba, the special modification of the cell membrane, it helps to get the food. So in the same way, if you see the other unicellular organism like paramecium, it is also called as a slipper animalcule because of the slipper shape. It has got a special groove called as oral groove. Oral groove. So this oral groove has got some hair-like structures on its body, and even in the oral groove, these are called as cilia. So the food is passed through this oral groove into the body. There is a point, specific point at which the food enters into the paramecium. So the paramecium, it moves in the water. Because of the water currents, the food, it moves in this way, and the food gets trapped in the oral groove and it is engulfed, taken into the body. So here for the movements, the hair-like structures called as cilia help the paramecium to obtain its food. But you can notice the difference between amoeba and paramecium. Amoeba, it has no specific spot for the intake of food. From any side it can produce the pseudopodia and take the food. There is no specific site of food intake in case of amoeba. Whereas in case of paramecium, there is a specific site for the food intake. Even you have a specific site to take the food in. That is our mouth. You cannot take the food through your ears or hands. Of course, you take help of your hands, but the food has to enter your body through the mouth. So that is the difference we find. So this is the case of unicellular organisms. How do they obtain their food? Now let us see the human digestive system, the starting point of the digestive system, from where the food enters and how the food is processed, how the useful materials from the food are extracted, absorbed and utilized. So let us look at the nutrition in human beings. It's carried out by a complex and well-organized system, a well-organized structure called the alimentary canal. So the process of digestion, the process of nutrition takes place in this alimentary canal. So this is a long tube-like structure. Let us see the description, the various parts of the human alimentary canal. The human alimentary canal begins at the mouth and it ends at the anus. It is a long coiled tube which has got various modifications. You can see the difference of the tube here. At this region it is like a bag-like structure. Again it is like some pipe-like structure in the intestines. So this way this long coiled tube is extended from mouth to the anus. So it is modified into different shapes as it has to perform different functions at each stage, at each place. And one more thing we can observe here, this alimentary canal is associated with some glands. Different glands are attached to this alimentary canal. You can see the liver, it is attached to the human alimentary canal, and gallbladder and pancreas. Pancreas is also attached. So these glands, they secrete some secretions. They pour their secretions into the alimentary canal, which help in the chemical digestion part. So now let us see the various parts. It starts with mouth and the long extending tube from the mouth to the stomach. This tube is called as esophagus. It is also called as food pipe. And here the esophagus is connected to the stomach. So the esophagus, it is passing through a muscular wall which separates the chest cavity and the abdominal cavity. This is the abdominal cavity and this is the chest cavity. Both are separated by a muscular valve called as diaphragm. So the diaphragm, this esophagus, it passes through the diaphragm and it enters into the stomach. Stomach is a muscular bag-like structure in which the process of digestion takes place, physical digestion. So from the stomach, you can see that at the end of the stomach, glands are connected like liver, pancreas, all are connected, and it continues as small intestine, and the small intestine, it continues as large intestine, and the undigested food is passed through the large intestine, reaches the rectum, and from there through anus it is excreted out. So here are the various parts of the human alimentary canal. Now let us see the process of digestion in humans. That is, the various kinds of changes happens to the food in the human alimentary canal. Let us begin with the mouth. The food we take, it has got different textures. We eat apples, we eat bananas, we eat rice, we eat chapatis. So in this way we eat different kinds of food. Each has got different texture, different level of hardness, different amount of water in them. Some foods are very dry, some foods are very hard like nuts, some foods are very soft and juicy, watery. So all these foods are to be made uniform. The complex parts or bits of food should be made into simple and easy to absorb material. So the food has to be made into a fine form, smooth and soft form. So from there the nutrients can be easily absorbed into the blood circulatory system, into the body. So this is achieved by this total apparatus, the digestion of the food. Here the food has to be converted into smaller bits. That takes place by a process called mastication, chewing of food. So whatever the food we take, just we do not swallow it. If you see birds, they do not swallow, they don't have teeth. Birds, they swallow the grains. But it is not like in case of birds. In human digestive system, first chewing takes place. So as soon as you keep the food in your mouth, you have to chew the food. What happens to the food in the mouth? Here, two kind of things happen in the mouth. One is physical Physical change takes place to the food, and the second one is chemical. Chemical change takes place to the food. One is physical change, the other one is chemical change. What is the physical change that happens to the food? So with the help of the structures present in our mouth, what are the various structures we have? We have teeth, tongue. These are the two structures that help to make the food into smaller bits. That is, we have different types of teeth like incisors, canines, premolars and molars to cut, tear, grind and chew the food. And tongue helps to move the food in a proper way, so by that the food is properly distributed under the teeth and it is thoroughly mixed with the other liquid, important liquid, that is secreted, saliva. So saliva is a liquid that is secreted by the salivary glands in our mouth. This saliva gets mixed up with the food, so it makes the food into a paste. So all the food is uniformly ground into a fine paste by chewing. So it makes the food soft. So by that we can easily swallow it. If it is not soft, you cannot swallow. So this is achieved by this saliva. So the physical digestion, that means the hard bits of food is made into smooth, soft, bolus. So by that it can easily pass through the esophagus. So that is what happens in the mouth, the physical part. And what about the chemical part? So physically the food is made into soft form. Chemically, what happens to the food? The food we are chewing, what we are chewing is well mixed with a liquid called saliva. Saliva not only helps to make the food watery, not only helps to make the food paste, it also contains certain enzymes called salivary amylase. Salivary amylase. So this is a chemical compound, an enzyme which act on the certain nutrients like carbohydrates that we eat in our food. So partially a bit of digestion takes place in the mouth itself. Food is partially digested in the mouth. Which part of the food? Carbohydrates are partly digested, that is by the action of salivary amylase. This salivary amylase, it digests the carbohydrates into simpler form, some simpler form. So the food is processed physically as well as chemically in the mouth. So once the food is made into a fine paste and a part of food is digested by salivary amylase, now the food is bolus and it is ready to be swallowed, sent down into the next part of the alimentary canal. So now here the food which is chewed well is made into a paste, soft. So this soft paste kind of food is easily passed in the esophagus. But how does this paste, the bolus food, moves in the esophagus? So esophagus is a long tube which is lined by some mucus. It is a long tube, but even then the food cannot simply pass in the esophagus because the food is not completely watery. The food is not completely a liquid. It is a paste kind of thing. So it has to be moved down in the esophagus. So that is achieved by the circular muscles present in the esophagus. So the esophagus has got longitudinal and circular muscles which produce a wave-like contractions and relaxations. So this kind of contractions and relaxations, if this is the food, so they have a contraction and relaxation. The circular muscles present here, they contract and push the food downwards. And the longitudinal muscles, they contract and relax. So the circular and longitudinal muscles contract and relax and push the food downwards. So these contractions and relaxations are wave-like and they are called as peristaltic movements. Peristaltic movements. So these peristaltic movements help the food to pass through the esophagus into the stomach. There is no digestion in the esophagus. Esophagus is just a passage, a tube through which the food passes from mouth to the stomach. That's all. So no other digestion takes place in this part. Only the peristaltic movements push the food downwards into the stomach. Now let us look at the features of the stomach. Stomach is a sac-like or a bag-like organ. It expands as soon as the food enters into it. It increases in size. It is a stretchable organ, muscular organ. So the food enters into the stomach. So even in the stomach, just like in mouth, in case of mouth, we have seen the food is digested in two ways. One is physical and second one is chemical. There is chemical processing, physical processing. In the same way, the stomach also does the grinding in two ways. Physical, grinding the food, churning the food, making the food into very soft and soft and soft. The fine paste called as chyme. So then the fine paste can enter the intestines for the remaining process. So that is the physical part of the stomach. What does it do physically? It churns the food. So the walls of this stomach, they secrete some kind of substances. The walls of the stomach consist of gastric glands which secrete HCl, hydrochloric acid, and pepsin, an enzyme, and mucus. What does this HCl do? It helps in the digestion of proteins. And at the same time, pepsin, an enzyme, it helps in the digestion of proteins. It converts the proteins into peptones and mucus. So the hydrochloric acid which is secreted into the stomach, this hydrochloric acid, it provides an acidic medium for the process of digestion, and that at the same time it kills the bacteria that enter the stomach through the food. So we are eating the food which may contain bacteria. So these bacteria are killed by the action of this hydrochloric acid. So that is the function of this HCl and pepsin. Then what does this mucus do? Mucus, it lines the walls of the stomach. It gives a protective layer for the walls, so by that the walls are not damaged by the HCl. So sometimes if there is any problem with the mucus, if the mucus layers are degenerated or spoiled, then we feel some burning sensation in the stomach. It may lead to some kind of lesions in the stomach which are called as ulcers or gastric problem, burning sensation in the stomach. That is the problem with the secretion and the layers of the mucus. So generally the mucus is secreted to protect the inner walls of the stomach from the action of this HCl. So inside the stomach, the proteins are partially digested, proteins are converted into peptones and other form, and the gastric juices, they chemically as well as physically, the food is digested, made into very soft and fine form. So here, till the food is made into soft form, it is not released into the intestine. Who controls that? Here is a sphincter, pyloric sphincter. So the sphincter, it will not allow the food till it is completely made into soft. So once the food is made into soft paste like one called as chyme, the sphincter muscles slowly release some amount of food into the intestines. The food is not released as a whole into the intestines. The food is released part by part by the pyloric sphincter. Sphincter is a valve kind of thing made up of muscles. It slowly releases the food from the stomach. The lower part of the stomach has got the finer food which is made into fine paste. Here the upper part, it contains the food which is having bigger particles. Still it is digesting. But here it is completely fine food is formed. So the fine form is slowly enters into the intestine through this pyloric sphincter. The sphincter slowly releases the food into the small intestine. Now let us see what happens to the food in the small intestine. So the food which is made into fine paste called as chyme is sent into this small intestine through this sphincter. So the food at which it is attached to the small intestine, there we can see some glands are attached to the alimentary canal. One is liver and other one is pancreas. So these two glands, liver and pancreas, they secrete their secretions into the small intestine. So these secretions, they also help in the chemical part of digestion. If you look at the pancreas, here we find the pancreas. So the pancreas, it secretes pancreatic juice which consists of trypsin and lipase, these enzymes. So the trypsin and lipase, the trypsin helps in the breakdown of proteins to peptones, lipase helps in breakdown of lipids. Anyway, initially the lipids, as they are in the form of a big molecules or a big droplets, they cannot be easily digested by lipase. So that reason the liver secretes a substance called as bile. The bile, it carries out a process called emulsification. After emulsification, the lipids are digested by the lipase. What is this emulsification? Say for example, if you take a glass of water And in the water, you kept some drops of oil. So this oil, it floats on the water. And how do you find the oil? Like big droplets, like coins. So in the same way, if you eat some oily food, some puri, some chapati, something which has got much oil, so this oil also floats in your stomach in the liquids in the form of big droplets. So if the fat is in the form of big droplets, the enzymes, they cannot act. They need more surface. If it is a very big droplet, the enzymes on the surface, they cannot break the fats. They must be formed into small droplets, then more enzyme can act on it. So the breakdown of big fat droplets into tiny droplets is emulsification. You are given a glass of water and some oil poured on it, and you are asked to make the oil into very fine droplets. What do? You will try to shake it. So even though by physical shaking, the oil cannot be broken down to small droplets. Again, the small droplets join together to form big droplets. Then if you mix some amount of detergent powder, some surf, detergent powder to this glass, then the detergent powder, it makes the oil droplets very small. This is called as emulsification. So that is what happens in our intestine by the action of the bile salts. So the bile juices are secreted by the liver, which contain bile salts and bile acids. These bile juices, they help in the emulsification of fats, making the big fat globules into tiny particles. So by that, the enzymes like lipase, they act on the fat particle. It can be digested to fatty acids. So fats are the complex molecules and fatty acids are the simpler molecules. So these complex fats are converted to simple fatty acids. So the fatty acids can be absorbed in the small intestine into the bloodstream. And trypsin, it converts the big protein molecules into small peptones. But even then, the peptones cannot be absorbed into our blood. They should be broken down into still smaller. That is achieved by the other hormones secreted by the intestinal juice. The walls of the intestine, small intestine, also secrete some juices which contain the peptidases, sucrases, maltases, lipase, intestinal lipase. So these peptidases, they convert the peptones into amino acids. So the digestion is finalized in the small intestine. It is completely digested. No more digestion is required. The complex food is made into very fine and simple molecules which can be easily absorbed into the blood. So these enzymes like peptidases, they convert the peptones to amino acids. Sucrases, they convert the sucrose into glucose. Maltases convert the maltose into glucose, and intestinal lipase converts the fats into fatty acids. So these are the very simple molecules, fatty acids, amino acids and glucose. These are the very simple molecules. So all the complex food which we have eaten is broken down in the mouth, it is churned in the stomach, it is made into very fine paste. The fine paste is mixed with many chemicals and chemical digestion took place. Finally, that food which we ate, it turned into very simple substances like amino acids, fatty acids, glucose. Now they are ready for absorption. So for this complete process of digestion in the small intestine, these glands and their secretions are helping. Pancreatic juices and liver secretes bile, and intestinal juice or succus entericus, it consists of these hormones which it consists of these enzymes which digest the food completely. So the digestion of the food completes in the small intestine. Small intestine is a very long organ and coiled. Even though it is very long, it fits in a very small space because of its coiling. So because of the coiling, the lengthy intestine is fit in a small space. So the length of the small intestine, it varies in different animals, depends upon the food they eat. Certain animals, they only eat meat, flesh of other animals. So they don't need very large small intestine because meat can be easily digested in a shorter time. So the length of the small intestine can be small. But whereas the animals like cow and buffalo which eat only grass, the grass consists of cellulose, it requires very long time for digestion. So they need a very long small intestine. So the length of the small intestine is varied in different animals. It depends upon the food they eat. Anyway, the process of digestion is completed in the small intestine. Now what happened to the undigested food? So now what happens to the undigested food? the undigested food is sent into the large intestine. So what about the digested food? The food is digested and made into very small and simple and absorbable form in the small intestine. Now, the nutrients from this digested food are absorbed into the bloodstream, blood circulation, because blood has to transport the nutrients to each and every cell for maintenance, for repair and for other purposes. So, if you see the cross section of small intestine, this is the wall of the small intestine. The small intestine has got so many foldings, finger-like structures. So, why this many foldings are there here? This is to increase the area of absorption. If the surface is folded, there is more area for absorption. Nutrients can be absorbed. So, here we can find some microvilli, tiny finger-like structures. If you see the finger-like structure in an enlarged microscope or something, in enlarged view, it will be like this, and all around the nutrients are absorbed, and inside the villi it is richly supplied with blood vessels. So these blood vessels, they absorb the nutrients here, and these nutrients are supplied to the blood circulatory system, the bloodstream. They are supplied to different cells. So from the digested food, the nutrients are absorbed, the water is absorbed. So these nutrients and water and everything is absorbed, and the remaining undigested food with some nutrients which are not absorbed and some water enters into the large intestine. So in the large intestine, the water is reabsorbed into the body, into the blood, because the water is needed for other purposes, other activities. The food, the undigested food is hardened, and this hardened food moves through the large intestine all around the colon, and it reaches the rectum and finally excreted through anus. Now let us look at the second important life processes, that is a respiration. So we discussed about the first life process, that is nutrition. It is a life process by which the needed materials are supplied to the organisms. Why the materials are needed? The materials are needed to get energy to carry out their activities, to survive and to maintain their bodies. So the supply of materials is required, and materials are supplied to the cells. Now what do the cells do with materials? The cells, they need energy, but the materials are supplied. Carbohydrates are supplied to the cells, proteins are supplied to the cells, amino acids and fatty acids are supplied to the cells. So what do the cells do with these materials? Actually, they need energy. Of course, they need some materials. Along with the material, they need energy. The energy is in the form of these materials, chemical energy. Energy is packed in the materials. Energy is packed in the glucose. Energy is packed in the amino acid. Energy is packed in the fatty acid. So how the energy comes out of these materials? So here, in the process of nutrition, the materials are supplied which have energy. Energy is there. So from the materials or from the molecules, energy has to come out. And this is achieved by the another life process, that is respiration. So respiration is a process in which energy is liberated out from the nutrients, from the molecules like glucose, amino acids and fatty acids. So these are the molecules, the primary molecules from which energy is derived. Most primarily glucose. Glucose is a major source of energy. Of course, at times amino acids, at times fatty acids also liberate energy. They liberate the energy by a process called as respiration. So respiration is a very complex process. It involves different processes. See, nutrition also, nutrition in the sense supplying the materials to the body, but this is done in different ways. So the organism, it has to obtain its food. So that is also a part of nutrition. How an organism is eating its food is also a part of nutrition. After eating, the food is converted to simple form, that is digestion. That is also part of nutrition. After digestion, the digested material has to be absorbed. Utilization of nutrients, that is also a part of nutrition. So nutrition involves so many stages. In the same way, respiration also involves so many stages. In general terms, in general notation, if someone says respiration, so most of the people compare the respiration with breathing. So can you, if you are asked to tell whether an organism is respiring or not, you will observe its movements. Its ribs are moving. So air is passed in and passed out. You can say that yes, respiration is going on. Simply you can say that breathing is going on. But breathing is only not the respiration. Breathing is not the complete respiration. So breathing is a part of respiration. Breathing, what happens? We take the air in and we leave the air in. That means for the process of release of energy from the molecules, air is required. So which part of air is required? Oxygen is required. So we are taking the air in which contains the oxygen that is supplied to the cells for the breakdown of these molecules, glucose to energy. So glucose to energy. What is this process? Respiration. This is also respiration. But it happens inside the cell, it is cellular respiration. So here what is needed? Oxygen is required. From where does this oxygen comes? Oxygen is supplied by the process of breathing. We take the oxygen from the surroundings by the process of breathing. And in this process, when the energy is released from the molecules, along with the energy, what is released? Carbon dioxide is released. So this carbon dioxide, it has to be sent out of our body. So carbon dioxide, it has to be sent into the atmosphere. Whereas from atmosphere, oxygen has to be taken in to our cells. So some gases are required by the cells. Some gas has to be sent out of this cell. So this is achieved by breathing. So when respiration is going on, which gas is released? Carbon dioxide is released. So we can prove this, the carbon dioxide is released during respiration. We can prove it with the help of an activity. Let us see. Now, let us see an activity by which we can prove that carbon dioxide is released during respiration, or we can prove that the gas that is present in the air which we leave out or which we exhale is carbon dioxide. Means whatever the air we are exhaling out, it contains carbon dioxide. From where it is coming? It is coming from the process of respiration. It is generated in the process of respiration. So this can be proved with the help of an experiment here. So here for this activity, you need 2 test tubes with freshly prepared lime water. So don't misunderstand, this is a lemon water. Lime water made up of calcium oxide mixed with water. So that is the lime water. So when the lime water reacts with carbon dioxide, it forms calcium carbonate. So you have taken freshly prepared lime water. You know how to make lime water. You have learnt in your chemistry lessons. So in first test tube, say it is A. Here you kept a straw, and with the help of the straw, you started blowing out air. So from where does the air comes? From your lungs. That means the air which is being expelled, exhaled. The exhaling air is blown into this freshly prepared lime water. Slowly what happens? The lime water turns milky. Milky. That means lime water reacted with carbon dioxide and calcium carbonate is formed, CaCO3. So calcium hydroxide to calcium carbonate is turned. Now let us look at the second one. Second test tube, label it as B. And in this test tube also you have taken freshly prepared lime water. But here instead of blowing air, you are using a pitchkari, a syringe. A syringe or pitchkari or something which you have to blow the air. So such kind of syringe you have taken and you are blowing the air. You are pumping the air into this water. Just you are pumping the air. Air which is present in the atmosphere. So now let us see the difference. Here also the water may turn milky. But it is very slow and very delayed. It takes very long time. Here it becomes quickly. Here slowly. Because the percentage of carbon dioxide present in the air is very less in the outside air. But the percentage of carbon dioxide present in the exhaled air is more. So here it happens quickly. So what does this experiment shows that the air that is exhaled during breathing, it contains carbon dioxide. And also it tells us that this carbon dioxide is generated in our body in a process called as respiration. Now let us look at one more activity. Respiration not only takes in human beings or in higher animals. Even in the simpler organisms also respiration takes place. Even in their respiration also carbon dioxide is released. Say for example, if we take the example yeast. Of course, the way the reproduction takes place inside the cells may be different between yeast and human beings. But finally here energy is released in the respiration, that is common. Energy is released. Along with energy, carbon dioxide is released. This is also common in any kind of respiration. Carbon dioxide is also released. So here, let us take the example yeast. Let us see whether the carbon dioxide is released or not in case of yeast during respiration. So what we are doing here, we are taking a small container or a test tube with some fruit juice. Fruit juice or sugar solution. So see that the fruit juice or sugar solution are not too cold. They are having a little bit of temperature, means that they are lukewarm. That means the activity of these organisms and the respiration is optimum at this temperature. So in this add some yeast. Yeast. Where do you get that yeast? We can get it from a bakery. In bakery, the bakers use the yeast to raise the dough to make the cakes and bread. So you can find the yeast in bakery. A baker's yeast, you can put some yeast and keep it closed. Now fit a cork which has got one hole through this, and through this hole put a pipe into this solution. So you have taken a glass pipe which can be bent by heating. So with the help of that glass pipe, you have bent the pipe in this shape. So it has got two bends here. The one end of the tube is entering into this test tube which is containing the fruit juice with yeast. So here you closed it with a rubber cork. So by that there is no chance of the gas which is formed here, it cannot escape. So there is no chance because it is closed. So this gas, it has to be passed only through this tube. So whatever the gas is released here, this gas, it has to pass through this tube in this way, and you arranged the tube to enter into another test tube which is having freshly prepared lime water. You know that if the gas released here is carbon dioxide, whenever it reacts with this lime water, it makes the lime water milky. So what do you think? What happens here? Even the yeast are the organisms that they carry out respiration when food is available here. That means the fruit juice is the food, it contains the sugars on which the yeast feeds. So the yeast convert the sugars to alcohols, and in this process energy is derived, energy is liberated. Along with energy, what is released in respiration? Carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide gas is released which is captured into this tube, and it passes to the other end of the tube and finally enters into the lime water, where it reacts with lime water to form calcium carbonate, which makes it to turn milky. So this experiment proves that carbon dioxide is released in respiration, and this experiment proves that even in case of respiration of yeast also carbon dioxide is released. So by these experiments we can understand that in the process of respiration carbon dioxide is released. Now let us see what exactly happens in this respiration, cellular respiration. That means the respiration which is taking place inside the cell. The first phase is transport or supply of gases. Oxygen is supplied, that is by breathing. Inhalation, exhalation. So in this process, the lungs and other parts of our respiratory system help. That is to get the oxygen. Once the oxygen is taken by the lungs have blood vessels which supply this oxygen to the cells. Now inside the cells, this oxygen is used to derive energy out of the nutrients, out of these molecules. So how this process takes place? Is it a single step reaction, releasing energy from the foodstuffs using oxygen? Do you think it is a single step reaction? Definitely not. So it is not a single step reaction. It is a series of reactions. It is a chain of reactions in which slowly, step by step, energy is released from the nutrients. So along with the energy, some carbon dioxide may be released. Some carbon dioxide is released and some toxins or waste materials are also produced in this process. Now let us see the different stages of this cellular respiration. Now let us see how the energy is liberated or released from glucose. So that is the different stages of cellular respiration. So basically the glucose is supplied to the cells. In the cell, in the cytoplasm, that is the location at which the primary part of this reaction takes place. So in the cytoplasm of this cell, the glucose is converted to pyruvate or pyruvic acid. So glucose is a 6-carbon compound which is converted to 2 pyruvate of 3 carbon each. A 6-carbon compound of glucose is converted to 2 pyruvic acid or 2 pyruvate of 3 carbon each. So this is called as glycolysis. So glycolysis means breakdown of glucose into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid which takes place in the cytoplasm. So this is common for any kind of respiration, even in the aerobic organisms or anaerobic organisms. That means some organisms, they carry out respiration without the presence of oxygen. Those are anaerobic organisms like bacteria, yeast. And other organisms, they carry out respiration in presence of oxygen like human beings. We carry out the respiration in our cells. The cellular respiration is carried out in presence of oxygen. So we are aerobic organisms. But whereas bacteria and yeast, they carry out the cellular respiration in absence of oxygen. Those are anaerobic organisms. So whether it is anaerobic respiration or aerobic respiration, the first part of the respiration, conversion of glucose to pyruvate, is carried out in the cytoplasm of the cell and in absence of oxygen. Oxygen is not required for this step. Both for aerobic organisms as well as anaerobic organisms, this conversion is common. What is that? Glucose is converted to pyruvate. 1 molecule of 6-carbon glucose is converted to 2 molecules of 3-carbon pyruvic acid. Now let us see what happens to this pyruvate in case of yeast, in case of aerobic organisms. In case of aerobic organisms like human beings, this pyruvic acid is converted to carbon dioxide, water and energy. So the molecule is completely utilized, and from that simple substances like carbon dioxide and water are released, and the total energy present in the pyruvate is utilized, released out, taken out. In which form? The energy will be released in the form of a molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So in this process, in aerobic respiration, that is in presence of oxygen, the pyruvic acid is completely released from energy. So the energy is completely taken out of this pyruvic acid and it is converted to carbon dioxide, water, and so the energy is derived out of this. So there are no big byproducts. There are no big biomolecules as products in this reaction. Only the simple substances like carbon dioxide and water are released out of it. So in case of absence of oxygen, like bacteria or yeast, if we take yeast, in case of yeast, what happens to this pyruvic acid? If the organism want to get complete energy from the pyruvate, whatever the energy is stored in the pyruvate, how many ATP are there in that pyruvate, if the organism wanted to take the whole energy, it needs oxygen. But here in case of yeast, no oxygen, absence of oxygen. In these cases, what happens? The respiration continues, which is called as fermentation. Here we are calling this process as fermentation, which happens in absence of oxygen. What happens is that ethanol and carbon dioxide are released. So pyruvic acid is converted to ethanol and carbon dioxide and energy, but the energy is less compared to aerobic respiration. In case of aerobic respiration, the energy present in the pyruvate is completely taken out. But whereas completely released here, but it is not completely released. Only a part of the energy is released and some energy is still stored in the ethanol. But the organism it cannot completely utilize the pyruvate. So in anaerobic respiration, these organisms get less energy out of the glucose when compared to aerobic organisms. In anaerobic organisms, along with the energy, some other material is also prepared, synthesized. So these are the differences between anaerobic respiration and aerobic respiration. So the organisms which can breathe and take oxygen in their bodies, aerobic respiration takes place. In our bodies also aerobic respiration takes place. But sometimes, in some cases, even in our bodies, on a temporary basis, anaerobic respiration takes place in certain situations. See, you are holding your breath while doing some exercise or jogging or running. So by holding your breath, you are running. So you are not breathing, you are not supplying oxygen to your body and you are running. In such cases, there is no oxygen to the cells, you are not breathing. You held up your breath for some time. So the cells are deprived of oxygen. What do? So there the energy is required. As you are running means lot of energy is required. So the glucose is converted to pyruvic acid. The first step doesn't require oxygen anyway. So the glucose is converted to pyruvic acid. That's fine. But the pyruvic acid has to give out energy, but there is no supply of oxygen in your muscles. In such cases, so the pyruvic acid is converted to lactic acid and energy. The pyruvic acid is converted to lactic acid and energy. Here also, the energy is not completely derived from the glucose because oxygen is not there. Only some energy. So you may get some energy from the glucose, not as you get in the aerobic respiration. If the oxygen is present, you will get that complete energy from the glucose. Oxygen is absent, you will get lactic acid and energy. So this lactic acid gets accumulated in your muscles. So as you are running up, in your muscles, this anaerobic respiration takes place when you hold your breath. When you stop the supply of oxygen temporarily, then lactic acid builds up in your muscles and it may lead to muscle cramps. Suddenly, if you are doing a vigorous exercise, giving some heavy work to your muscles, if that oxygen is not sufficient, it may lead to muscle cramps. You may feel that pain in your muscles because due to the accumulation of lactic acid. But this is a temporary one. Soon you release your breath, soon you take the oxygen, slowly this lactic acid is again converted to pyruvic acid and it goes on as usual in the reactions. So this is the way how the glucose is converted to energy in different situations and in different cases like anaerobic respiration and aerobic respiration. So whatever may be the respiration, finally, what is the needed thing here? Energy. In anaerobic respiration, less energy plus some other product like ethanol. In aerobic respiration, energy is released in large quantity. Along with that, some carbon dioxide and water are released. Here all the cases we see that the energy is released. In which form the energy is released here? In which forms the cells can readily use the energy? That is the ATP. So in this respiration, energy is finally released in the form of ATP. So ATP are called as cell currency. That means for various activities of this cell, ATP are required. Of course, you may be, say just for an example, you may be holding a check which is worth of some 10,000 or 20,000. You may be holding a gold bar which is of worth 50,000 or 1 lakh. But you cannot use that gold bar or check to buy some provisions in a shop. You need to carry some cash with you. So in the same way, here the energy is packed in this glucose and pyruvate. Finally, for the cells, the energy is required in the form of ATP. So ATP is called as cell currency because for all activities of this cell, ATP are required. So energy is finally released in the form of ATP. So we have seen how the energy is released from the molecules like glucose in the process of cellular respiration. So energy is released in the form of a molecule called as ATP. So what is this ATP? Adenosine triphosphate. So its name itself indicates that there are 3 phosphates in this adenosine. say this is adenosine. So it has got 3 phosphates. Some 3 phosphates here. So adenosine triphosphate. So this is the molecule which has got the energy packed in it. In endothermic reactions, that means the reactions which absorb the heat, which absorb the energy, are called endothermic reactions. So in endothermic reactions, the energy is absorbed by splitting this ATP into ADP, adenosine diphosphate, plus inorganic phosphate. So ATP is broken down to ADP and inorganic phosphate. So when this breaking takes place, energy is liberated and used by that reaction. So in this way, the ATP, the energy currency molecules of ATP, are utilized inside the cells. When the terminal phosphate of an adenosine triphosphate is split by water molecule, we get 30.5 kilojoules per mole of energy. So this much of energy is released. This ADP, again they get the another phosphate bond and they become ATP. So this takes place during the cellular respiration. Again these ADP are converted to ATP. So ATP is an energy packed molecule. Once the energy is taken out, it becomes adenosine diphosphate. So it is stored in that last terminal phosphate, third phosphate of this ATP. So this is how energy is supplied. This energy is used for various chemical reactions, just simply like how a battery or a cell is used to run different kind of things. The chemical energy in the battery is used as a light energy, sound energy, mechanical energy. So we can use it in different forms. In the same way, the energy present in the ATP is utilized for various reactions inside the cells. So we have seen that respiration, the cellular respiration, in which energy is released from the molecules like glucose. But here, if you see the aerobic respiration, so the aerobic respiration requires oxygen, takes place only in presence of oxygen. How the aerobic organisms get the oxygen? Where is it present? Oxygen is present in the air as well as in the water. The organisms that live on land, they get the oxygen from the air. Air is around us. Air contains oxygen. So how do organisms obtain this oxygen? If you see plants, they have special pores called as stomata through which the oxygen can be taken in. Of course, the plant produces oxygen and releases out, but sometimes when the photosynthesis is not done, the plant may take oxygen from outside even. That happens through the stomata. In this way, the oxygen is supplied to the bodies of plants. Whereas if you see the microorganisms, unicellular organisms, how do they get? They get the oxygen by simple diffusion. Their bodies are very simple and the oxygen present in the atmosphere can easily diffuse into their bodies. But if you see the multicellular organisms, they have well-developed structures to absorb the oxygen from the air. We see a gradual development of respiratory structures from different organisms, from smaller organisms to higher organisms. If you see in that insects, they have some air spaces in their bodies, air tubes, through which they respire, tracheal respiration. So whereas if you see the frogs and all, they absorb the oxygen through their moist skin, and even they have lung-like structures to breathe in. And if you see that the other animals like lizards or snakes, reptiles, they have respiratory structures, lungs, so they breathe through that. If you see the higher animals, cats, dogs, humans, they have well-developed lungs to absorb the oxygen from the air. If you see the animals that are living in water, aquatic organisms, they have to absorb the oxygen from the water. The availability of the oxygen is different in different types of water bodies. It depends upon the purity of the water. Polluted water bodies contain very less amount of oxygen. So the percentage of oxygen is not stable in water. It is a problem to the aquatic organisms. So aquatic organisms like fishes, they will take the water into their mouth, and from the mouth it is pushed into their phoral cavity or buccal cavity. From there it is pushed into the pharynx where the gills are arranged. So this water is pushed onto the gills and the gills are made wet. So the gills, they have blood vessels. When this water comes in contact with the blood vessels, the oxygen is diffused into their blood. So from there it is carried to the body. So this is a bit quite complex process that is observed in the fishes, and I already told you that the percentage of oxygen is different in different water bodies. If the percentage of oxygen is less, the fish has to drink the water, take the water into its mouth continuously and push the water onto its gills, so by that the gills are bathed with water. From there the oxygen is absorbed by diffusion and the remaining water is pushed out through the gill lids, that is called as operculum. See, if you see a fish from its top position, top view, we see like this. So the water enters into the mouth of the fish. The fish, it has got the gills here. So whatever the water is taken into its mouth, the fish opens its mouth and takes the water. Then it raises its lower cavity of the mouth. It raises its lower floor of the mouth. So by that, the pressure pushes the water onto the gills and the water comes out. As the water is passing over the gills, from the gills, whatever the blood vessels are present in the gills absorb the oxygen from this water and this oxygen is supplied to the body parts. This is in case of fish. Different aquatic organisms have different arrangements to absorb the oxygen from the water. Terrestrial animals, they have plenty of oxygen, 21% of oxygen in the atmosphere, and they have developed special structures to absorb the oxygen. Even in the terrestrial organisms like human beings, we have to take the air in to special structure where the absorption, diffusion of oxygen takes place. We need lot of oxygen. So definitely we need lot of surface for the process of diffusion. See, we cannot take the oxygen through our skin. Our skin has large surface, it is exposed to the air. But from the air, our skin cannot take any oxygen. The air has to go into some structure in which the diffusion of gases takes place. So this structure is well protected inside the body, that is the lungs. If we observe the human respiratory system, so it has got different parts. Let us see how the oxygen is diffused here and how the oxygen enters. The oxygen mixed with air, that means the air which contains oxygen, oxygenated air, it enters our body through the nostrils. We have a pair of nostrils. The air passes through these nostrils. Inside the nostril we have some hairs to filter the dust and insects. There we have some mucus which absorb the dust and which moist the air before enters into the lungs, so by that the lungs are not collapsed. So the air enters into this nasal cavity which is lined with mucus. The air is humidified here. The humidified air is passed through this special structure called as windpipe. This is the windpipe or trachea. We have a windpipe. The windpipe begins with a special structure called as larynx, voice box, that means which enable us to produce the sounds while exhalation of the air. So the air passes through this windpipe and it divides into two branches called as bronchi. So these bronchi are divided into some other branches, finer branches, bronchioles, and finally they end up with small bubble-like structures, tiny grape-sized bubble-like structures. These are alveoli. So alveoli are the units of lungs. The structural and functional unit of lung is alveoli. Every alveoli, if this is the alveoli, every alveoli is richly supplied with blood vessels. Blood vessels are there in this alveoli. When we inhale the air which contains oxygen, when the air enters into this alveoli, so here in the alveoli, the diffusion of gases takes place between the blood and alveoli. So the alveoli are like small bubbles folded because large amount of area is kept in small place. So more surface in less space. So as the surface is more, there is a chance for more diffusion of gas. So more amount of gas, oxygen is diffused into the blood. So this oxygen is carried to different body parts. So humans have this kind of well developed structures for the diffusion of oxygen, that is for the collection of oxygen, as well as for the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Now let us see how the energy is liberated or released from glucose. So that is the different stages of cellular respiration. So basically the glucose is supplied to the cells. In the cell, in the cytoplasm, that is the location at which the primary part of this reaction takes place. So in the cytoplasm of this cell, the glucose is converted to pyruvate or pyruvic acid. So glucose is a 6-carbon compound which is converted to 2 pyruvate of 3 carbon each. A 6-carbon compound of glucose is converted to 2 pyruvic acid or 2 pyruvate of 3 carbon each. So this is called as glycolysis. So glycolysis means breakdown of glucose into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid which takes place in the cytoplasm. So this is common for any kind of respiration, even in the aerobic organisms or anaerobic organisms. That means some organisms, they carry out respiration without the presence of oxygen. Those are anaerobic organisms like bacteria, yeast. And other organisms, they carry out respiration in presence of oxygen like human beings. We carry out the respiration in our cells. The cellular respiration is carried out in presence of oxygen. So we are aerobic organisms. But whereas bacteria and yeast, they carry out the cellular respiration in absence of oxygen. Those are anaerobic organisms. So whether it is anaerobic respiration or aerobic respiration, the first part of the respiration, conversion of glucose to pyruvate, is carried out in the cytoplasm of the cell and in absence of oxygen. Oxygen is not required for this step. Both for aerobic organisms as well as anaerobic organisms, this conversion is common. What is that? Glucose is converted to pyruvate. 1 molecule of 6-carbon glucose is converted to 2 molecules of 3-carbon pyruvic acid. Now let us see what happens to this pyruvate in case of yeast, in case of aerobic organisms. In case of aerobic organisms like human beings, this pyruvic acid is converted to carbon dioxide, water and energy. So the molecule is completely utilized, and from that simple substances like carbon dioxide and water are released, and the total energy present in the pyruvate is utilized, released out, taken out. In which form? The energy will be released in the form of a molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So in this process, in aerobic respiration, that is in presence of oxygen, the pyruvic acid is completely released from energy. So the energy is completely taken out of this pyruvic acid and it is converted to carbon dioxide, water, and so the energy is derived out of this. So there are no big byproducts. There are no big biomolecules as products in this reaction. Only the simple substances like carbon dioxide and water are released out of it. So in case of absence of oxygen, like bacteria or yeast, if we take yeast, in case of yeast, what happens to this pyruvic acid? If the organism want to get complete energy from the pyruvate, whatever the energy is stored in the pyruvate, how many ATP are there in that pyruvate, if the organism wanted to take the whole energy, it needs oxygen. But here in case of yeast, no oxygen, absence of oxygen. In these cases, what happens? The respiration continues, which is called as fermentation. Here we are calling this process as fermentation, which happens in absence of oxygen. What happens is that ethanol and carbon dioxide are released. So pyruvic acid is converted to ethanol and carbon dioxide and energy. But the energy is less compared to aerobic respiration. In case of aerobic respiration, the energy present in the pyruvate is completely taken out. But whereas completely released here, but it is not completely released. Only a part of the energy is released and some energy is still stored in the ethanol. But the organism it cannot completely utilize the pyruvate. So in anaerobic respiration, these organisms get less energy out of the glucose when compared to aerobic organisms. In anaerobic organisms, along with the energy, some other material is also prepared, synthesized. So these are the differences between anaerobic respiration and aerobic respiration. So the organisms which can breathe and take oxygen in their bodies, aerobic respiration takes place. In our bodies also aerobic respiration takes place. But sometimes, in some cases, even in our bodies, on a temporary basis, anaerobic respiration takes place in certain situations. See, you are holding your breath while doing some exercise or jogging or running. So by holding your breath, you are running. So you are not breathing, you are not supplying oxygen to your body and you are running. In such cases, there is no oxygen to the cells, you are not breathing. You held up your breath for some time. So the cells are deprived of oxygen. What do? So there the energy is required. As you are running means lot of energy is required. So the glucose is converted to pyruvic acid. The first step doesn't require oxygen anyway. So the glucose is converted to pyruvic acid. That's fine. But the pyruvic acid has to give out energy, but there is no supply of oxygen in your muscles. In such cases, so the pyruvic acid is converted to lactic acid and energy. The pyruvic acid is converted to lactic acid and energy. Here also, the energy is not completely derived from the glucose because oxygen is not there. Only some energy. So you may get some energy from the glucose, not as you get in the aerobic respiration. If the oxygen is present, you will get the complete energy from the glucose. Oxygen is absent, you will get lactic acid and energy. So this lactic acid gets accumulated in your muscles. So as you are running up, in your muscles, this anaerobic respiration takes place when you hold your breath. When you stop the supply of oxygen temporarily, then lactic acid builds up in your muscles and it may lead to muscle cramps. Suddenly, if you are doing a vigorous exercise, giving some heavy work to your muscles, if that oxygen is not sufficient, it may lead to muscle cramps. You may feel that pain in your muscles because due to the accumulation of lactic acid. But this is a temporary one. Soon you release your breath, soon you take the oxygen, slowly this lactic acid is again converted to pyruvic acid and it goes on as usual in the reactions. So this is the way how the glucose is converted to energy in different situations and in different cases like anaerobic respiration and aerobic respiration. So whatever may be the respiration, finally, what is the needed thing here? Energy. In anaerobic respiration, less energy plus some other product like ethanol. In aerobic respiration, energy is released in large quantity. Along with that, some carbon dioxide and water are released. Here all the cases we see that the energy is released. In which form the energy is released here? In which forms the cells can readily use the energy? That is the ATP. So in this respiration, energy is finally released in the form of ATP. So ATP are called as cell currency. That means for various activities of this cell, ATP are required. Of course, you may be, say just for an example, you may be holding a check which is worth of some 10,000 or 20,000. You may be holding a gold bar which is of worth 50,000 or 1 lakh. But you cannot use that gold bar or check to buy some provisions in a shop. You need to carry some cash with you. So in the same way, here the energy is packed in this glucose and pyruvate. Finally, for the cells, the energy is required in the form of ATP. So ATP is called as cell currency because for all activities of this cell, ATP are required. So energy is finally released in the form of ATP. So we have seen how the energy is released from the molecules like glucose in the process of cellular respiration. So energy is released in the form of a molecule called as ATP. So what is this ATP? Adenosine triphosphate. So its name itself indicates that there are 3 phosphates in this adenosine. say this is adenosine. So it has got 3 phosphates. Some 3 phosphates here. So adenosine triphosphate. So this is the molecule which has got the energy packed in it. In endothermic reactions, that means the reactions which absorb the heat, which absorb the energy, are called endothermic reactions. So in endothermic reactions, the energy is absorbed by splitting this ATP into ADP, adenosine diphosphate, plus inorganic phosphate. So ATP is broken down to ADP and inorganic phosphate. So when this breaking takes place, energy is liberated and used by that reaction. So in this way, the ATP, the energy currency molecules of ATP, are utilized inside the cells. When the terminal phosphate of an adenosine triphosphate is split by water molecule, we get 30.5 kilojoules per mole of energy. So this much of energy is released. This ADP, again they get the another phosphate bond and they become ATP. So this takes place during the cellular respiration. Again these ADP are converted to ATP. So ATP is an energy packed molecule. Once the energy is taken out, it becomes adenosine diphosphate. So it is stored in that last terminal phosphate, third phosphate of this ATP. So this is how energy is supplied. This energy is used for various chemical reactions, just simply like how a battery or a cell is used to run different kind of things. The chemical energy in the battery is used as a light energy, sound energy, mechanical energy. So we can use it in different forms. In the same way, the energy present in the ATP is utilized for various reactions inside the cells. So we have seen that respiration, the cellular respiration, in which energy is released from the molecules like glucose. But here, if you see the aerobic respiration, so the aerobic respiration requires oxygen, takes place only in presence of oxygen. How the aerobic organisms get the oxygen? Where is it present? Oxygen is present in the air as well as in the water. The organisms that live on land, they get the oxygen from the air. Air is around us. Air contains oxygen. So how do organisms obtain this oxygen? If you see plants, they have special pores called as stomata through which the oxygen can be taken in. Of course, the plant produces oxygen and releases out, but sometimes when the photosynthesis is not done, the plant may take oxygen from outside even. That happens through the stomata. In this way, the oxygen is supplied to the bodies of plants. Whereas if you see the microorganisms, unicellular organisms, how do they get? They get the oxygen by simple diffusion. Their bodies are very simple and the oxygen present in the atmosphere can easily diffuse into their bodies. But if you see the multicellular organisms, they have well-developed structures to absorb the oxygen from the air. We see a gradual development of respiratory structures from different organisms, from smaller organisms to higher organisms. If you see in that insects, they have some air spaces in their bodies, air tubes, through which they respire, tracheal respiration. So whereas if you see the frogs and all, they absorb the oxygen through their moist skin, and even they have lung-like structures to breathe in. And if you see that the other animals like lizards or snakes, reptiles, they have respiratory structures, lungs, so they breathe through that. If you see the higher animals, cats, dogs, humans, they have well-developed lungs to absorb the oxygen from the air. If you see the animals that are living in water, aquatic organisms, they have to absorb the oxygen from the water. The availability of the oxygen is different in different types of water bodies. It depends upon the purity of the water. Polluted water bodies contain very less amount of oxygen. So the percentage of oxygen is not stable in water. It is a problem to the aquatic organisms. So aquatic organisms like fishes, they will take the water into their mouth And from the mouth, it is pushed into their phoral cavity or buccal cavity. From there, it is pushed into the pharynx, where the gills are arranged. So this water is pushed onto the gills, and the gills are made wet. So the gills, they have blood vessels. When this water comes in contact with the blood vessels, the oxygen is diffused into their blood. So from there, it is carried to the body. So this is a bit quite complex process that is observed in the fishes, and I already told you that the percentage of oxygen is different in different water bodies. If the percentage of oxygen is less, the fish has to drink the water, take the water into its mouth continuously and push the water onto its gills, so by that the gills are bathed with water. From there, the oxygen is absorbed by diffusion, and the remaining water is pushed out through the gill lids, that is called as operculum. See, if you see a fish from its top position, top view, we see like this. So the water enters into the mouth of the fish. The fish, it has got the gills here. So whatever the water is taken into its mouth, the fish opens its mouth and takes the water. Then it raises its lower cavity of the mouth. It raises its lower floor of the mouth. So by that, the pressure pushes the water onto the gills and the water comes out. As the water is passing over the gills, from the gills, whatever the blood vessels are present in the gills absorb the oxygen from this water, and this oxygen is supplied to the body parts. This is in case of fish. Different aquatic organisms have different arrangements to absorb the oxygen from the water. Terrestrial animals, they have plenty of oxygen, 21% of oxygen in the atmosphere, and they have developed special structures to absorb the oxygen. Even in the terrestrial organisms like human beings, we have to take the air in to special structure where the absorption, diffusion of oxygen takes place. We need lot of oxygen. So definitely we need lot of surface for the process of diffusion. See, we cannot take the oxygen through our skin. Our skin has large surface, it is exposed to the air. But from the air, our skin cannot take any oxygen. The air has to go into some structure in which the diffusion of gases takes place. So this structure is well protected inside the body, that is the lungs. If we observe the human respiratory system, so it has got different parts. Let us see how the oxygen is diffused here and how the oxygen enters. The oxygen mixed with air, that means the air which contains oxygen, oxygenated air, it enters our body through the nostrils. We have a pair of nostrils. The air passes through these nostrils. Inside the nostril we have some hairs to filter the dust and insects. There we have some mucus which absorb the dust and which moist the air before enters into the lungs, so by that the lungs are not collapsed. So the air enters into this nasal cavity which is lined with mucus. The air is humidified here. The humidified air is passed through this special structure called as windpipe. This is the windpipe or trachea. We have a windpipe. The windpipe begins with a special structure called as larynx, voice box, that means which enable us to produce the sounds while exhalation of the air. So the air passes through this windpipe and it divides into two branches called as bronchi. So these bronchi are divided into some other branches, finer branches, bronchioles, and finally they end up with small bubble-like structures, tiny grape sized bubble-like structures. These are alveoli. So alveoli are the units of lungs. The structural and functional unit of lung is alveoli. Every alveoli, if this is the alveoli, every alveoli is richly supplied with blood vessels. Blood vessels are there in this alveoli. When we inhale the air which contains oxygen, when the air enters into this alveoli, so here in the alveoli, the diffusion of gases takes place between the blood and alveoli. So the alveoli are like small bubbles folded because large amount of area is kept in small place. So more surface in less space. So as the surface is more, there is a chance for more diffusion of gas. So more amount of gas, oxygen is diffused into the blood. So this oxygen is carried to different body parts. So humans have this kind of well developed structures for the diffusion of oxygen, that is for the collection of oxygen, as well as for the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So when we are discussing about the different parts of the transport system, we discussed it there. The transport system, it consists of blood vessels and heart. So these are the three major parts of transport system. Among this, the blood, it consists of plasma and it consists of cells, and among these cells we discussed about WBC and RBC. We discussed about the different things which involve in the functioning, its major role: supply of materials, collection of materials, that is distribution, circulation of materials. But sometimes there is one part of these cells which take part in the maintenance of the transport system, repair of the transport system. The blood, it consists of cells RBC, WBC and RBC. Along with that, the blood also contain platelets. What are these platelets? So these platelets, they help in clotting of the blood vessels, clotting of the blood if there is any damage to the blood vessels. So if there is any damage to the blood vessels, and why the blood vessels are damaged? Maybe because of accident. What is that accident? Accidentally some knife while cutting vegetables or while cutting fruits accidentally. So you may have some cut. So you cut your finger while cutting fruits or vegetables. So then what happens? You see that blood coming out, bleeding takes place. So you have cut your finger, in the sense your blood vessels are cut, they are damaged. What happens? Then the blood flows out from your circulatory system. If it happens continuously, if you lose all the blood present in your body, then what happens? The person will die. But it doesn't happen. The bleeding, it stops automatically after some time. That means the blood has got some repair mechanism by which it stops the bleeding naturally. Of course, sometimes you put your effort, you put your finger, you put some cloth, you put something there, you tie it hard, you put some cold water or ice to stop bleeding. You put your efforts to reduce the bleeding, but naturally, internally you have some mechanism in your blood itself which will prevent the excess bleeding, that is the platelets. So when there is a damage to the blood vessel, if the blood vessel is damaged here, the blood, it flows out. So in the blood vessel, the platelets, they gather together, and these platelets, they block the blood vessel and they initiate a series of reactions. They will convert some material, some enzymes into some proteins. So these proteins, they join together to form some fibers, and these fibers along with the platelets, they form the clot. So clotting is a physical as well as a chemical reaction which will stop the bleeding. They will block the damage happened to the blood vessel. They will control the flow of the blood. So platelets, they help in the repair mechanism of the blood vessels. So let us talk about another important fluid that also takes part in the transportation of materials in our body, that is lymph. Lymph is also a fluid like blood, but lymph is not having any pigments. It is a white color fluid, white in color. So how this lymph is formed? The blood from the capillaries. The capillaries, capillaries are the fine blood vessels that connect the arteries and veins. They are located in the places where the arteries are connected to the veins. So this is, just think this is an artery, this is a vein. So the blood is supplied. So it passes through these capillaries. These fine tubes are capillaries. The capillaries are connected to the cells. So what happens? From these capillaries, some fluid, some plasma, it escapes out into the intracellular spaces. intracellular spaces, the gaps between the cells. Into that spaces, some fluid is escaped from the blood. What is that fluid? Plasma. It contains some proteins. So this liquid, it forms a lymph. So this lymph, slowly it passes into the lymphatic vessels, and it moves in the lymphatic vessels, and finally it drains into the veins. Again the lymph is poured into the veins. The lymph from the digestive system, it carries the fats that are digested and absorbed in the intestine. They are carried by the lymph. They are collected by the lymph. So the lymph also contains certain cells which take part in providing immunity. So this lymph is also an important fluid in our body, but it is not circulated as like blood, because blood is circulated by heart, pumped by heart, but lymph is not like that. The lymph, it carries fat, and the lymph, it carries the proteins from the intracellular spaces. It enters into the lymph vessels, lymphatic vessels, and again it is drained into the veins. So here the movement of this lymphatic fluid is totally dependent on our body movements. That is the reason why people are asked to do exercise. You may think that why exercise? Why I should give movement to my body? Because our heart is there, it is pumping. But if you put all the load on your heart itself, so the various liquids like lymph and all, how do they move? They don't have any backup support like heart. They have to move on their own. That depends upon the body movements. Even when the blood is flowing in your legs at certain points, it is totally based upon the movements of your body. So you need to give movement to your body at least in some or other way. You call it as exercise, or you call it as yoga, or you call it as whatsoever, fitness, gym. You have to give some movements to your body. So by that, these materials are transported properly. It creates some kind of movements in these vessels, whatever we have, and the movements are properly circulated or transported. So the body is cleansed up. So we discussed about the transport system in animals, that is in human beings, blood vessels, heart. It's a complicated system, complex system, well developed system, because the requirement of animals is very different compared to plants. Animals, they require very good transport system because they go in search of their food, and their eating habits are different, and their energy requirements are entirely different. But whereas a plant, its energy requirements are very less, because plant itself has got the own energy harvesting mechanism, that is photosynthesis. Now let us see, but even then the plants also need a kind of transport system. Let us see how they are able to transport the materials in their bodies. If you see the body design of a plant, the plant is basically having two major parts, shoot and root. The root is under the soil, and the shoot is above the ground, where you can see it grow the various parts, leaves like this. So from where does this plant get the materials? In plants, many of the materials like either gases, carbon dioxide or water, they can be simply absorbed by diffusion. Diffusion is a mechanism by which they can simply absorb the materials, but it is limited. Sometimes diffusion may not be possible from this point to this point, because certain trees, they grow very tall, meters of height, more than 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet, 50 feet. So that much height. So here it may not be possible by simple methods like diffusion or osmosis. The materials cannot be transported. Actually, what are the basic materials that are transported here in plants? You see, water is the major one. Along with water, minerals. Because for the growth of plant, water is needed as well as minerals like sodium, potassium, phosphorus. Along with that, so many other, zinc is required, magnesium is required. So in this way, so many minerals are required by the plant, and these minerals are absorbed along with the water, and the water, it need to be transported to very long distances in the plant, because here this is the site of photosynthesis in the leaf. Water is required there, water is available in the ground. So from here the water has to be transported there. But as I told you, the growth pattern or the energy production is less compared with the animals. Energy requirements are less in plants compared to animals. So here the process is slow, the transportation is also slow. They have some tissues to transport the water, but they don't have any pumping organs like heart in animals. Plants do not have any pumping organ. And this is the one way, that is water from roots to the tip of the plant, to different parts of the plant. In this direction transport is required, and food is prepared in these parts. Sometimes the food has to be stored here. In case of carrots or other plants, food is stored in the roots. Sometimes the food is stored in the stem. Sometimes the food is stored in fruit. So if the food is produced in the leaf, it has to be stored in the fruit. So it should be transported to this fruit. So here the transport is required. The prepared food materials are to be transported. So the transport of water and minerals is done by a special tissue called as xylem, and transport of food, other materials, is done by phloem. These are the two different tissues which form the vascular tissue. We call it as a vascular tissue. The plant stem has got, stem and root, they have got a vascular bundle at the middle. The vascular bundle is comprised of the two tissues, xylem and phloem. The construction of the xylem and phloem, the various parts of the xylem and phloem are studied in your 9th class plant and animal tissues. So in this lesson you learnt about this xylem and phloem, what are the components and how do they work. So here the plants, they have the transport system, that is the vascular system, which consists of xylem and phloem that help in the transportation of water and food materials. So in plants we discussed that there are some tissues called as xylem and phloem that help for the transportation. But what are the driving forces? So xylem is responsible for the transportation of water, phloem is responsible for the transportation of food. So here the transportation of water, transportation of food, what are the driving forces, what makes them flow, move in these tissues? So here the transportation of water, the transpiration is the major process which makes the water to flow up in upward direction, that is from the roots to the tip of the leaves. So what is this transpiration? The leaves of the plants or trees, they have pores through which the water is evaporated continuously, that is by the transpiration. The plant, it loses water in the form of water vapor. So when the stomata are open, the water vapor, it goes out. So the water is absorbed here, the water vapor is evaporated here. So as the water vapor is evaporated in the leaves will pull the water from the bottom. So this transpiration, it creates a suction effect. Suction effect, that means a pull of water from the roots. So by that the water is traveled in the xylem in this way. So this is a kind of physical force, and there are some kind of other forces also. The binding force between the water molecules, the coercive forces and other forces also, they drive the water to travel up. But here the transport of water is only one direction, unidirection. So this is achieved by simple physical forces. The second task is transportation of food is not achieved by the simple physical process. The second part, the transport of food, is called as translocation. The food, it has to be transported from one part to another part, not always in one direction, sometimes to the top parts, sometimes to the bottom parts. When the leaves are preparing the food, once the food is prepared, the prepared food is, sometimes it is transported in the root, stored in the root. So the food has to be transported to the root, downward translocation. Sometimes when the plant is blooming, the food is required in the bud part. So from the root, the food, it should be transported to the bud, upward direction. So sometimes food is transported downward, upward, you call it as translocation. So this cannot be done by the simple physical forces like this transport of water. There the energy has to be spent for transportation. The energy in the form of ATP is spent for the translocation. So how this ATP helps? So in the part of the plant where it wants to create the pressure, so into that particular area, sucrose is pumped into that particular area. So sucrose is pumped by ATP. Once the sucrose is injected into the particular cells, then what happens? It creates more pressure compared to other cells. So here the energy in the form of ATP is useful for the translocation. Let us see how. So when the materials are to be transported, substances like sucrose are sent into the phloem tissue, that is by the energy molecules ATP are utilized here, and this sucrose is mobilized into that phloem tissue. So this creates the pressure, osmotic pressure. So this osmotic pressure makes the food materials to move in the tissues. So this creates, so for this creation of osmotic pressure, energy is spent in the form of ATP. So that is what observed in the transportation of food, that is the translocation, which is done by the energy usage process. So this is the process which is not as simple as this one, like transportation of water. It is involved only the physical forces, but here the energy is spent in the form of ATP to drive the food materials from one location to another location, which we call it as a translocation. In this way, the food and water are transported in plants. So now let us see the excretion, the another important life process. So excretion helps in the elimination of waste materials, that is in the either animals or plants. Let us see in case of human beings first. And we have seen that in our bodies, the energy is required to carry out various activities, maintenance, and for our growth and survival. So for this energy, materials are supplied from outside of our body, that is the food material and oxygen are supplied, and both these materials are reacted, oxidized in the cells in respiration. So energy is released. Food and oxygen reacts and energy is released. Along with the energy, what is released? Waste is released. Waste is produced in the form of carbon dioxide plus urea and other materials. But this waste, it cannot stay back in the body for a long time. It is not it is a harmful material. If these materials, they stay in our blood for a long duration, they may affect our health and systems. So these materials are to be sent out of the body. So how it is done? So the elimination of waste materials out of our body is called as excretion. Here also the transport system takes part. The transport system takes these materials from the source of production, that means from the cells, from where they are produced. The blood collects these materials and supply to that respective systems which will clear it off. What are the systems? CO2 is taken to lungs, because in the lungs carbon dioxide is expelled out. Then how about the urea? Urea, if it remains back in our blood, it is dangerous condition. It is a toxic material, it toxicates various body parts. So this urea has to be eliminated, and the removal of urea is done by the excretory system of our body. Excretory system. What is this excretory system? We have a pair of kidneys for the excretion of wastes like urea. So where are these pair of kidneys located? They are located in our abdominal cavity. So that is towards the back side. You can feel that they are below your rib cage. At your back side you have a pair of kidneys. So what do these kidneys do? They are red color bean shaped organs present in your abdominal cavity, and they have organs called as kidneys and urinary bladder, ureter and urethra. So kidneys are the major organs of excretion. Let us see how the excretion, how the filtration takes place. So the blood, the deoxygenated, the blood which is supplied to the body parts from the heart. So the blood is supplied to the kidneys even. And the kidneys, they have got highly coiled blood capillaries. So in these blood capillaries, the kidneys, they have structural and functional units called as nephrons. So these nephrons are associated with blood vessels. Nephrons are the tiny filters. The blood is pumped into the kidney through these highly coiled capillaries. So these capillaries are connected to what? Nephrons. Nephrons are the thread-like structures present in the kidney. So these nephrons, they will absorb the toxic materials from the capillaries. They will absorb the toxic material like urea, uric acid, other salts. And these nephrons, they collect all these waste and they concentrate the waste. That means they remove the excess water and they concentrate it. And this concentrated waste in the form of urine, it is passed through the ureter and reaches the urinary bladder. So what is the function of this nephron? What is nephron? Nephron is a unit of kidney. What is the function of the nephron? To filter the blood. What does it filter? It removes the urea. Along with the urea, some water is absorbed, some salts are absorbed. But reabsorption takes place. So whatever the salt is absorbed, whatever the water is absorbed, and whatever the waste is absorbed, the waste is kept back, the water is reabsorbed. So the urine is concentrated. Otherwise, we would go for a toilet for a number of times and we may excrete large volumes of urine. We lose water from our body. It doesn't happen. Whatever the water is absorbed by the kidneys, the water is reabsorbed. Only the waste with little amount of water, it is concentrated to concentrated urine. So the concentrated urine is passed through the ureter and reaches the urinary bladder. So once the urinary bladder is full, we get the sensation of going to a toilet and then we excrete the urine out. In this way, the waste is excreted out in case of human beings. So this is achieved by a pair of organs called as kidneys. So kidneys, they filter the blood to remove the toxic materials, nitrogenous waste like urea, uric acid and other salts. Carbon dioxide is excreted by lungs. Now let us see the excretion in plants. So plants do not have any well-developed excretory system and they don't produce the amount of toxins as we compare to other animals and all. So here, but even then they have some kind of waste materials. We know how the gases are managed in their bodies, plants. Oxygen and carbon dioxide, they can easily exchange with the air with the help of stomata. So they have no problem in exchanging the gases. They can release it out, the carbon dioxide, or they can take the carbon dioxide, they can take the oxygen, or they can produce the oxygen. So that is managed in such a way. But what about the other wastes, metabolic waste? The reactions takes place in their cells and many materials are produced. These materials are stored in the vacuoles of this cell. Sometimes they are stored in the leaves. Wastes are stored in the leaves and seasonally or occasionally the leaves fall. Sometimes these leaves, after completing their life, the leaves become yellow and dry, they fall down. So along with that leaf, the waste is sent out of the body. Sometimes some wastes are stored in the resins and gums. Certain plants, they secrete resins and gums which consist of waste materials. Of course, they have some commercial value for these resins and gums. We find it they are useful for us, but they are the waste materials for the plant. So it throws out the waste in the form of resins and gums. Certain plants, they store their waste materials in the form of crystals called as raphides. And recently it is found that some plants, they excrete the waste materials from their roots into the soil also. So in this way they have certain various mechanism of getting rid of waste materials, but they don't have a system like kidneys and excretory system what we have seen in case of animals. So this is how the various life processes in plants as well as in animals, how they are controlled. So the major purpose of this life processes we studied. Once again, we just recall it. The main purpose is that survival of the organism, maintenance and repair of the organism, growth and development of the organism. You say something is a living thing, it must have these life processes. Otherwise, it is not living. A living thing must have some movements in its internal body parts. Of course, certain animals, they have external movements. Even though they don't have external movements, they have some kind of movements in their cells. Molecules flow. The molecules from outside in the form of air or oxygen, in the form of food or any other materials enter the body. So many reactions takes place. Waste is excreted. Useful materials are utilized. The organism grow, reproduce and perpetuate its race. And every time the organism's, the status, the life is maintained. The body parts, when they are damaged, they are repaired. So everything is carried out by this life processes which we have discussed here. So those are the nutrition, respiration, transportation and excretion. If you like this video, please give a thumbs up. Please subscribe to our channel to get more videos on CBSE syllabus.